Most people think of work as an ordinary place to earn a living, follow routines, and head home at the end of the day. But sometimes, the workplace becomes the setting for unimaginable horror. Beneath the hum of machines and the rhythm of daily tasks, tragedies unfold that are so disturbing they haunt everyone who witnesses them. In this video, we'll uncover 5 of the most disturbing workplace deaths ever recorded. Real stories of lives cut short in shocking and unforgettable ways.
We have continuing coverage this morning of that deadly explosion in Oakwood Village. The blast happened yesterday afternoon at the I. Schumann & Company metal plant. One man was killed in the explosion and another 13 people injured. Witnesses say the explosion could be felt.
It was February 20th, 2023, just after 2:15 p.m., when Bedford, Ohio was rocked by an explosion so powerful it could be heard miles away. Inside the I. Schumann & Company metal manufacturing plant on Alexander Road, workers were going about another ordinary shift until the world around them erupted into chaos. The blast came suddenly. The first explosion was small, a warning no one understood, but the second tore through the plant with devastating force. Windows shattered in nearby businesses, cars and parking lots were crushed by falling debris, and a thick column of smoke twisted into the sky, carrying with it the sound of fire alarms, screaming, and pure panic. Among the 14 workers inside was Steve Mullins, a 46-year-old maintenance worker who had given nearly 3 decades of his life to that factory. He had started right out of high school, building a career brick by brick, day by day. He was the kind of man people trusted, the kind of worker who showed up no matter what. But on that day, his loyalty to the plant would cost him everything. When the furnace erupted, molten metal rained down like fire from the heavens. Flames consumed the building in minutes, walls crumbled, and parts of the facility collapsed around the terrified workers. Those who could stumbled out in shock, faces covered in ash, clothes burned, skin blistered. Some barely able to walk, others too stunned to speak. Witnesses from nearby businesses described the explosion as deafening, a sound that stayed in their bones long after the smoke began to clear. Steve was pulled from the wreckage, his body covered in severe burns. Emergency crews rushed him to the hospital, fighting to keep him alive, but despite their efforts, he didn't make it. After nearly 30 years of dedication, his life ended in a moment of fire and steel. His death wasn't just a number in a report. It was a devastating loss for his family, his friends, and his co-workers who had stood beside him for decades. Investigators quickly suspected the cause. Water had leaked onto molten metal inside one of the furnaces, creating a catastrophic steam blast. But what made it worse, what made it unforgivable, was the fact that this plant had been warned before. In 2019, OSHA inspectors found serious safety violations, workers exposed to molten metal without proper gear, unsafe conditions that should have been corrected long ago. One worker had already suffered severe burns back then, but the changes weren't made, at least not the way they should have been. Now, after the tragedy, lawsuits have been filed. The injured workers and the families of those lost argue that negligence and broken safety protocols paved the way for disaster. And for many in Bedford, the questions linger heavily. Could this have been prevented? Would Steve Mullins still be alive today if the warnings had been taken seriously? The company has since shut down operations at the plant, promising to support employees and cooperate with investigators. But promises and condolences don't erase the trauma of that day. They don't bring back a man who had spent most of his life inside those walls, trusting that the place where he gave his time, sweat, and years would keep him safe. It was December 22nd, 2022, in the quiet suburb of Gurnee, Illinois. Inside a frozen pizza factory, the smell of dough and tomato sauce hung in the air as machines hummed through the night. For 29-year-old Ley Lopez Hernandez, it was supposed to be just another overnight shift. She had left her home in Honduras chasing the promise of something better, of safety and stability. But that night, inside the Miracapo Pizza Company plant, that promise was shattered forever. Ley worked as a temporary sanitation worker, hired through a staffing agency called Cell Staffing Solutions. Her job was simple on paper: clean the machines after production. But that night, something was different. The machines were still running. No one stopped them. The conveyor system, a massive, spiraling piece of machinery used to cool freshly baked pizzas, kept moving, its metal belts spinning endlessly. Sometime after midnight, Ley began cleaning the spiral conveyor with compressed air. She wasn't supposed to be anywhere near it while it was running, but But she didn't know that. She hadn't been trained on how to stop it. In fact, she wasn't even allowed to turn it off. She was just doing what she was told, trying to finish her shift. And then, in an instant, everything went wrong. When police and firefighters arrived later that morning at 10:04 a.m., they were met with a nightmare. Lay's body was discovered beneath the conveyor system. Investigators later learned her head had been pulled into the machine while she was cleaning it. The coroner's report listed her cause of death as sharp force and crushing injuries. She died instantly. The conveyor was still running when first responders arrived. For her co-workers, the horror was unbearable. One of them had gone to collect the air hose and found her, a sight no one could ever unsee. But the real tragedy wasn't just the gruesome accident itself. It was what investigators discovered afterward. When OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, began investigating, they found a pattern of neglect so deep it made Lay's death feel inevitable. The company, Little Lady Foods, had already been warned. Just weeks before, another worker at the same facility had lost an arm while repairing a sauce depositor that had been left running. A year earlier, in 2021, yet another employee lost part of a finger while fixing a jammed conveyor belt. None of these warnings changed anything. OSHA uncovered 29 safety violations, 16 of them classified as willful, meaning the company knowingly ignored basic safety rules. 12 more were labeled serious. The most alarming violation involved a failure to follow lockout-tagout procedures. Because that rule was ignored, Lay was cleaning a live, moving conveyor when it killed her. Miracapo Pizza was fined over $2.8 million and placed on OSHA's Severe Violator Enforcement Program, a public list of the most dangerous workplaces in America. The sanitation contractor, GDI Services, which employed many of the temporary workers, was also fined for failing to train or protect employees. But fines couldn't bring Lay back. As the investigation unfolded, a darker truth emerged. Most of the night shift cleaning crew were immigrants who spoke little or no English. Many were from Honduras, Guatemala, or Mexico. Safety instructions were written only in English. Some workers said they were warned not to complain, even when conditions became unbearable. Freezing cold in some rooms, scorching heat in others. If we got sick, we were told not to come back, one worker said later during a Zoom conference with labor organizers. When OSHA released its final report, the language was clinical but damning. Lay's death, it said, could have been prevented.
Emmanuel Torres, the oldest son of Eleazar Torres Gomez. On March 6, 2007, Emmanuel's father was killed while working at a Cintas laundry in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
On March 6, 2007, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, inside the Centis uniform facility, 46-year-old Eleazar Torres Gomez clocked in for another shift. Centis wasn't just any company. It was one of the biggest uniform providers in North America, with over 32,000 employees and hundreds of plants. Around 9:30 a.m., one of the industrial dryers suddenly stopped. The conveyor belt had jammed. For most places, that would mean halting production and calling maintenance. But inside Centis, workers admitted it was common to climb onto moving belts to clear jams, a dangerous shortcut that had quietly become routine. So, when the jam occurred, Eleazar did what many before him had done. He climbed up to fix it. He wasn't supposed to. It wasn't even his job. But he wanted to keep the line moving. Then, something went terribly wrong. The massive dryer roared back to life. Eleazar was pulled inside, into a metal chamber that reached over 300 degrees Fahrenheit. For nearly 20 minutes, the machine kept spinning. Workers nearby heard banging from inside, but thought it was just loose parts. No one stopped it. By the time maintenance opened the dryer, the smell of burnt fabric filled the air. Inside, they found Eleazar. He had been trapped in unimaginable heat. There was no chance of survival. Police ruled it a workplace accident. But to Eleazar's family, that explanation wasn't enough. His wife, Amalia Diaz Torres, filed a lawsuit against Centis, accusing the company of putting profit before safety. Centis denied the claims, insisting Eleazar ignored his training and that management had no idea employees were climbing belts. But workers told a different story. One said it happened all the time. Surveillance footage backed that up. The case never went to trial. Just before it began, Sentis quietly reached a private settlement with Amalia. The amount was never revealed, but OSHA's investigation exposed a disturbing pattern of negligence across multiple Sentis plants. The company was fined $276 million, or one of the largest workplace safety penalties of its time. When ABC's Nightline aired a report in 2010, Elizar's death drew national attention. That same year, more than 5,200 American workers died on the job, an average of 14 every day. OSHA Director Dr. David Michaels condemned companies that rewarded silence over safety, exposing a culture that prioritized production over lives. Unions soon rallied around Elizar's story. Brave New Films released a documentary calling his death preventable, urging support for the Employee Free Choice Act, which would make it easier for workers to unionize. Public outrage grew. The National Association of Letter Carriers, whose uniforms came from a Sentis subsidiary, even launched a temporary boycott. Eventually, under federal pressure, Sentis agreed to major safety reforms: automatic shutoff systems, stricter training, and rules forbidding anyone from climbing belts while machines were running. It was October 30th, 2021, at the La Jolla Zip Zoom zipline on the La Jolla Indian Reservation in Palma Valley, California. The sun was beginning to dip behind the ridges, casting long shadows across the valley where thousands of visitors had come before, chasing the thrill of flying 100 feet above the ground. For 34-year-old Wen Romero, it was just another shift, another day ensuring the safety of customers who trusted him with their lives. But in a matter of seconds, routine turned into tragedy. That evening, Romero was assisting a woman on the launch platform, double-checking her harness as she prepared to take off. It was a task he'd done countless times, but as she started to move, something went wrong. She slipped out of position, her body tilting dangerously. Without hesitation, Romero grabbed her harness, steadying her before she could fall, but in saving her balance, he lost his own. Both were suddenly dangling over the valley, suspended nearly 100 feet in the air. The zipline stretched for more than half a mile, capable of carrying riders at speeds over 50 miles per hour. But for Romero, there was no thrill in this moment, only a terrifying realization. The line was never meant to hold two people like this. Their combined weight could strain the cable. Something had to give. And so, in one split-second decision, Romero did the unthinkable. He let go. The woman remained safely secured, her life spared. But Romero plummeted nearly 70 feet to the ground below. When emergency crews from CAL FIRE reached him, he was still alive, battered and broken. They worked desperately, rigging ropes and lifting him out before airlifting him to Sharp Memorial Hospital. Doctors fought for 2 days to save him, but on November 1st, 2021, Romero's injuries claimed his life. The woman he saved walked away unharmed, alive because of his sacrifice. In the days that followed, tributes poured in. To those who knew him, Romero wasn't just a worker, he was a father, a friend, and now, a hero. A GoFundMe was launched to support his child, and donations flooded in, surpassing expectations. People who had never met him grieved because the story of his sacrifice was impossible to ignore. But beneath the grief lay something darker: anger. Because Romero's death wasn't only about bravery, it was about failure. Investigators found that the zipline lacked the very safeguards that could have saved him. No safety nets, no guardrails, no proper fall arrest systems. Employees, including Romero, had not been adequately trained to handle fall hazards. OSHA issued citations for 4 serious violations, with potential fines reaching $225,000. But the fines were nothing compared to what was lost. Since 2015, the La Jolla Zip Zoom had attracted countless thrill seekers. But unlike major amusement parks, zip lines on tribal land often fall into regulatory gray areas, with fewer rules and less oversight. That loophole left workers like Romero vulnerable, and in his case, it cost him everything. His story lingers because it forces us to ask the hardest questions. Could his death have been avoided if the proper safety systems had been in place? If management had taken training and fall risks more seriously, would he still be alive today? The answers won't change what happened, but they reveal the truth. This wasn't just an accident. It was a tragedy born from preventable gaps in safety. Yet when people remember Wen Romero, they won't only remember the failures that cost him his life. They'll remember the moment he let go, not because he had to, but because he chose to. He gave everything to protect someone else. His sacrifice will never be forgotten, even as the zip line remains closed and the investigation continues. It was August 16th, 2012, in Jacksonville, Florida. For 21-year-old Lawrence Day Davis, that day marked the start of something new, his first real job. He'd just been placed at the Bacardi Bottling Corporation through a staffing agency called Remedy Intelligent Staffing. The plant was massive. It was loud, chaotic, and full of energy. He slipped on his orange safety vest, adjusted his glasses, and snapped a photo. Smiling, proud, ready. He sent it to his fiancée, Alicia. They were expecting their first child that October. That picture, full of hope, would be the last one he ever sent. Day's first hours on the job were rushed. He filled out paperwork, watched a short safety video, and was sent straight to the factory floor. No real hands-on training. No one showed him how to stay safe around the towering machinery. One crucial safety step, the lockout-tagout procedure, meant to ensure machines are powered down before anyone works on them, was never explained. Within 90 minutes of starting, something went wrong. A palletizer machine, used to stack heavy cases of rum bottles, jammed. Each load weighed nearly 2,000 pounds. Bottles shattered, glass scattered. Day was told to clean up underneath the hoist. It was a dangerous spot, but he followed orders. While he crouched beneath the machine sweeping glass, another worker, unaware Day was still there, restarted it. In an instant, the palletizer roared back to life. With a thunderous crack, nearly 60 cases came crashing down. The weight was unimaginable. There was no warning, no escape. Seconds earlier, he was cleaning up. Now, he was gone. On his first day, barely 90 minutes into his shift, the life he was building for Alicia and their unborn child was over. When OSHA investigators arrived, what they found was damning. Bacardi Bottling had failed to properly train its temporary workers. The lockout-tagout procedures, the most basic safety rule, had been ignored. Workers were performing dangerous tasks without guidance, and supervisors let it happen. OSHA issued 12 violations, including 2 willful, meaning Bacardi knew the rules but ignored them. The company was fined $192,000, later reduced in a settlement, but no amount of money could account for the life lost. Investigators uncovered something even darker, a pattern across America's factories. Temporary workers were being placed in high-risk environments with little or no training. Because they weren't permanent employees, companies treated them as expendable, cheap labor that could be replaced. For many, like Day, their first shift was also their last. OSHA's chief, Dr. David Michaels, said too many temporary workers were dying within days of starting new jobs, a hidden crisis buried behind contracts and corporate loopholes. Remedy Intelligent Staffing faced no penalties. Bacardi claimed Day wasn't their employee, so they weren't responsible. OSHA disagreed, insisting both the staffing agency and host company must share responsibility for worker safety. Day's story gained national attention when the documentary A Day's Work was released. Narrated by his sister Nia, then a high school senior, it told the story from the family's perspective, their mother's heartbreak, their younger brother's confusion, and the silence that followed. The film included footage from the factory floor, which their mother couldn't bring herself to watch. Through tears, Nia explained that her brother wasn't reckless. He was eager. He wanted to work, to provide, to do things right. But the system that promised him opportunity gave him danger instead. More than 14 million Americans work as temporary employees each year. Most stay less than 3 months, often in hazardous environments with little training. They're the easiest to overlook and the easiest to replace. After Day's death, OSHA began cracking down on companies that exploited temporary workers, requiring training before any hazardous task and ensuring it's provided in a language every worker can understand. But for Day Davis, those changes came too late.
Worker at Montgomery Regional Airport. Family members identified the worker as Courtney Edwards on December 31st, 2022.
It was December 31st, 2022, at Montgomery Regional Airport in Alabama. Inside the terminal, families were reuniting, laughter echoing through the halls. But on the tarmac, where the sound of jet engines filled the night, 34-year-old Courtney Edwards was starting another shift. She was a ground handling agent for Piedmont Airlines, a regional carrier for American Airlines. A mother of 3, Courtney had volunteered to work New Year's Eve, one more night away from her family so that others could get home to theirs. She was known for her dedication, her pride in her work, and her belief that every passenger deserved to land safely. But that night, as Flight 3408 from Dallas touched down, the holiday spirit turned to horror in a matter of seconds. The plane, an Embraer E-175 jet carrying 59 passengers and 4 crew members, had just arrived at the gate. Everything appeared routine, but inside the cockpit, the pilots faced a technical issue: the auxiliary power unit. The small engine that powers a plane while it's on the ground wasn't working. That meant the main engines would have to stay on until ground power was connected. The rule was simple and well known. No one goes near the aircraft until the engines stop and the red beacon light, the flashing warning on top of the plane, turns off. The light means danger. It means the engines are still alive, spinning with unimaginable force. Before the jet landed, the ground crew held not one, but 2 safety briefings. Everyone was reminded, the engines will stay on. Keep your distance. Wait for the light. But when the plane rolled to a stop and the passengers looked out the windows, none of them could have imagined what they were about to witness. Security footage later showed Courtney walking toward the aircraft, holding an orange safety cone in her gloved hands. It was part of her job, marking the plane once it had parked. But at that moment, the beacon light was still flashing. The engines were still roaring. A nearby co-worker saw her moving toward the left wing and immediately sensed something was wrong. The blast from the jet wash nearly knocked her backward. He waved frantically, shouting for her to stop. Another worker, on the opposite side, had just been warned by the co-pilot to stay back, and he did. But Courtney didn't hear the warnings in time. A sudden, violent sound broke through the noise of the engines. A deep thud, followed by a jolt that shook the entire aircraft. The co-pilot felt it instantly. He killed the remaining power and rushed out to see what had happened. When he stepped onto the tarmac, the awful truth came into view. Courtney had been pulled directly into the running engine. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, later confirmed what happened in their report. She had entered the ingestion zone, the 15-foot radius in front of a running jet engine where suction is powerful enough to drag in anything, clothing, luggage, or even a person, in less than a second. The engine's emergency systems automatically shut down, but by then, there was nothing anyone could do. On board, passengers felt the plane tremble violently, but didn't yet understand why. Some thought the aircraft had hit an object on the tarmac. Others realized something far worse had happened when the captain's voice came over the intercom, shaky and quiet. Outside, her colleagues stood frozen, unable to process the horror that had unfolded before them. Courtney's death devastated everyone who worked at the airport. She was remembered not as a careless employee, but as a hardworking mother who gave everything to her job. Co-workers described her as the kind of person who always showed up, someone who took extra shifts so others could spend time with their families. Richard Honeycutt, vice president of the Communication Workers of America, said it best. She was working on New Year's Eve so others could get home for the holidays. A GoFundMe set up for her family aimed to raise $25,000. It surpassed $100,000 within days.
Owensboro, the Davis County Sheriff's Office saying tonight that one person is dead after an accident involving landscaping equipment.
It was November 28, 2022, in Owensboro, Kentucky. A crisp evening when the streets were glowing with the magic of the annual Owensboro Christmas lights display, a tradition that drew thousands of families every year. Children laughed, couples strolled, and for many, it was the beginning of the holiday season. But for 46-year-old Joseph Joey Wesley Mann, that night would end in a tragedy no one in the community could ever forget. Joey had spent years in the tree trimming business. He was dependable, hardworking, and loved by those who knew him. That evening he was on the job, trimming trees near the very lights that would soon become the backdrop for heartbreak. Around 5 p.m., as he worked his way through the branches, something unexpected happened. A strand of holiday lights, tangled deep in the tree, snagged him. What should have been a minor inconvenience turned into something far more dangerous. As Joey tried to free himself, he lost his balance. In one horrifying instant, he fell directly into the wood chipper waiting below. A machine built to rip through heavy branches, steel, and debris showed no mercy. The injuries were catastrophic. By the time emergency responders arrived, it was already too late. The Davis County Sheriff's Office later confirmed there was no foul play, no negligence, no faulty equipment. It was simply a devastating accident, one that shocked the entire town. How could something so ordinary, so routine, turn so deadly in seconds? News of Joey's death spread quickly, and with it came an outpouring of grief. Friends and family flooded social media with tributes. His longtime friend, Gregory Huntley, wrote one of the most gut-wrenching messages of all. "You left behind a river of tears this morning," he wrote, "and that river will grow into an ocean as more people hear the news. God doesn't make men like you anymore. I'm grateful to have had a friend like you." He recalled how they had planned a fishing trip they never got to take, a dream now forever out of reach. His message ended simply, "I will see you again someday. Until then, fly high and keep an eye on us." The Christmas lights that night stayed on, but they glowed with an eerie sadness. The display, meant to bring joy, had become a backdrop for tragedy. Organizers urged visitors to stay away for the evening, to give space for emergency crews. Families who had come for magic instead went home with heavy hearts. Joey's death was more than a freak accident. It was a chilling reminder of how unforgiving machines like wood chippers can be. Studies show dozens of fatal accidents involving them in the U.S., many of them eerily similar. Workers pulled in, trapped, gone within seconds. Despite all the regulations, despite all the training, when something goes wrong around a machine like that, there is no time to react. For Joey, it all started with a single strand of Christmas lights. Something so small, so harmless, set off a chain of events that ended his life. And now, every holiday season, when the Owensboro lights flicker to life, they carry a weight they never did before. They shine not just with festive joy, but as a quiet tribute to the man who worked beneath them, a man taken too soon, in a way no one could have imagined.
Looks like any old piece of metal, a cannonball or a small wrecking ball maybe. But if you had the misfortune to handle this incorrectly, you would most certainly have a painful and horrible death.
It was May 21st, 1946, a quiet afternoon at Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico. Inside a small, heavily guarded room, 8 scientists gathered around a table. At the center of that table sat something that looked ordinary, a 3.5-inch sphere of metal. But everyone in that room knew what it really was, a piece of plutonium so unstable it could end their lives in a fraction of a second. They called it the Demon Core. Among them stood 35-year-old physicist Louis Slotin, a Canadian scientist who had helped build the first atomic bomb. To most of his colleagues, Slotin was brilliant, confident, fast, maybe even fearless. But to others, he was playing with fire. He was known for pushing limits, taking shortcuts, and working without the safety measures that others depended on. Slotin had lived a life built on intellect and ambition. Born in Winnipeg in 1910 to a Jewish family who fled Russia, he grew up surrounded by struggle, but also curiosity. From a young age, he excelled in science, winning awards in physics and chemistry. By his mid-20s, he had earned degrees from the University of Manitoba and a PhD from King's College, London. He boxed for sport, taught in Ireland, and even bragged, perhaps falsely, that he fought in the Spanish Civil War. But the real battlefield was waiting for him in the laboratories of the Manhattan Project. By 1942, Slotin was one of the few people in the world trusted to assemble nuclear cores. His job was to measure just how close materials could get to critical mass, the point where a nuclear chain reaction begins. These were called criticality tests, and Richard Feynman once described them as tickling the tail of a sleeping dragon. One of those dragons had already struck. 9 months earlier, another physicist, Harry Daghlian, had dropped a tungsten brick onto the same core, unleashing a burst of deadly radiation. He died slowly, in agony, 25 days later. The core was shelved, cursed with a new name, the Demon Core. But on that May afternoon, Slotin decided to tickle the dragon again. The setup was simple, at least in theory. A beryllium shell would be carefully lowered over the plutonium core, with thin metal shims keeping them from touching completely, the only thing preventing a nuclear reaction. But Slotin wasn't using shims. Instead, he was holding the top shell steady with nothing but a flathead screwdriver, his own fingers just inches from catastrophe. At exactly 3:20 p.m., the screwdriver slipped. The two halves met. A blinding blue flash filled the room. Everyone felt it. a wave of invisible energy that seared through the air. Slotin's hand burned instantly. A metallic taste filled his mouth. He knew right away what had happened. "Well," he said quietly, "that does it." In a split second, he had received a lethal dose of radiation. But he didn't panic. He pulled the top shell away, breaking the reaction and saving everyone else in the room. Then he stepped back, trembling. Within moments, he was nauseated and vomiting. The others rushed him to the hospital. For the next 9 days, Louis Slotin fought a losing battle. His body began to break down from the inside. His skin blistered, his white blood cell count dropped to 0, and his organs began to fail one by one. Doctors could do nothing but watch. On May 30th, 1946, with his parents at his bedside, Slotin slipped into a coma and died. In the aftermath, the laboratory shut down all hands-on nuclear tests. From then on, experiments were done remotely, with robotic arms and reinforced walls separating humans from the deadly materials they once touched barehanded. It was June 22nd, 2019, in Iloilo City, Philippines. A day that should have been ordinary, routine, and uneventful. For 18-year-old Jar Junko, it was only his second week at the sausage-making factory. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the dangerous machinery. His role was simple: pack the finished products. Nothing more, nothing less. But that morning, something would pull him into a nightmare no one could have imagined. Jar showed up at 7 a.m., eager to start his shift. He worked alongside his co-worker, Carl David Carlos, who was more experienced and responsible for operating the heavy equipment. One of those machines was a massive meat mixer, its sharp blades designed to churn through pounds of meat with brutal efficiency. Jar wasn't trained to touch it. He wasn't authorized to go near it. Yet for reasons no one will ever fully understand, he did. At around 11:30 a.m., Carl briefly stepped away. Just a few minutes. That's all it took. Alone in the factory, Jar approached the machine while it was still running. Maybe he was curious. Maybe he thought he could fix something or retrieve a piece of material. But the moment his right arm reached inside, everything changed. In an instant, the blades caught him and pulled him into the machine. When Carl returned, what he saw would haunt him forever. Jar's legs were sticking out of the mixer. The machine had already stopped, but it was too late. Panicked, Carl tried to shut it down, but there was nothing more he could do. Jar was trapped inside. Emergency responders rushed to the scene, but even for them, saving him was impossible. The machine had to be dismantled piece by piece before they could even remove his body. By the time they pulled him out, Jar was gone. He hadn't been torn apart, as some feared, but authorities confirmed he had likely suffocated, pinned inside by the relentless force of the mixer. He was only 2 weeks into the job. 2 weeks, with no training on that machine, no supervision at that moment, and no second chance. The factory owner later expressed his condolences, describing Jar as hardworking, but admitting his curiosity may have cost him his life. Carl, still shaken, told reporters that the mixer's motor had stalled midway. He believed Jar might have tried reaching inside while it was still moving, not realizing the danger until it was too late. "You cannot reach the switch from there," Carl explained. "It's possible he put his hand near the blades." Police ruled out foul play. Surveillance footage and witness accounts confirmed Jar was alone when the tragedy happened. His death was labeled an accident. But was it really that simple? Because questions linger. Why was an inexperienced teenager left alone near such dangerous equipment? Was the safety training truly enough, or just a formality? Could stricter rules, better supervision, or stronger enforcement of safety protocols have saved him? Or was this a case of youthful curiosity meeting an unforgiving machine? It was February 17th, 2023, when 24-year-old Sean Clear, a young mechanic from Balacola, County Lowie, Ireland, lost his life in the most tragic and unexpected way. He had traveled halfway across the world to New Zealand only a few months earlier, in October 2022, filled with excitement to work, save money, and experience life abroad. Just days before his 25th birthday, that dream came to a sudden, devastating end. Sean wasn't just another worker on a farm. Back home, he was the kind of person everyone knew. He grew up in Balacola, a small town where friendliness and community meant everything. He was outgoing, always up for a chat, and loved by his teammates at the KF Balacola GAA club where he played hurling. His father, Tom, was well known too, having served as vice chairman of the Lowes County Board. For a town so close-knit, Sean's death wasn't just heartbreaking, it was unthinkable. That day, Sean was working for Kavanaugh Contracting on a farm near Wakapapa Village in New Zealand's North Island. The job seemed straightforward: help recover a mower that had gotten stuck in the mud after Cyclone Gabrielle. A digger was brought in to lift it, and Sean was there steadying the mower. But in an instant, everything went horribly wrong. The digger's boom made contact with an overhead power line carrying 33,000 volts of electricity. The current surged through the machine, and Sean, standing nearby, became the path for that deadly energy. The shock was immediate. It killed him instantly, leaving his co-workers frozen in horror. For his family and friends back in Ireland, the news hit like a thunderbolt. A young man so full of life, with everything ahead of him, was gone in an instant because of a mistake that could have been prevented. Investigators later revealed that Kavanaugh Contracting had failed in some of the most basic safety precautions. They hadn't even identified the power lines as a hazard. No risk assessment, no spotter to guide the machinery, nothing to stop what happened that day. Because of this negligence, the company was fined $25,000 and ordered to pay $100,000 in reparations. But money meant nothing compared to the life lost. In the days after, tributes poured in from home. Friends and teammates spoke of Sean's kindness, his hard-working spirit, and the way he always had a word for everyone. "It's just terrible," said Gordon Pearson, chairman of KF Balacola GAA. The entire community came together, surrounding his parents, Tom and Julie, and his sister, Ella, with support. When Sean's body was flown back to Ireland, the grief was palpable. On February 25th, hundreds gathered for his funeral, a final goodbye to a young man who should have had decades ahead of him. But Sean's death wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was a warning. Just 3 months later, in May 2023, another worker, Holmes O'Connor, was critically injured in a similar accident in New Zealand after coming into contact with a high-voltage line while on scaffolding. He suffered burns, fractures, and life-threatening injuries. Once again, companies were fined. But once again, the question hung in the air: how many times does this have to happen before safety is truly prioritized? WorkSafe New Zealand concluded that Sean's death was not an unavoidable accident. It was preventable. His life could have been saved if basic safety laws had been followed, if someone had been paying attention to the risks right above them. It's a chilling thought. One moment, you're steadying a piece of equipment, and the next, you're gone. Not because of chance, but because of someone else's failure. For those who knew Sean, he will always be remembered as the kind, hard-working young man whose life was stolen far too soon. For the rest of us, his story is a haunting reminder that workplace safety is never something to take lightly, because one overlooked hazard, one unchecked risk, can mean the difference between going home at the end of the day or never coming home at all.